as well. Good. Just welcome everybody to London Vegans meeting. Some of you have been with us for quite some time over the past few years as we've been doing these online meetings. Usually we are having a meeting the last Wednesday of the month. Could I just ask if people could mute themselves? There's one or two people I think that haven't yet. I may be able to mute you from this end. If you could mute yourself, please, if not already done, just so that we're not having any external noise. Just say, there will be taking questions. So the process for this evening is we're going to be doing a Q&A and a bit of a discussion with Ronnie Lee. I'll do a little bit of an introduction in a moment's time. If you have any questions, if you could save them towards the end, and then we'll introduce other people to ask questions if they haven't already been answered, if that's okay. It's a different meeting to normal in that rather than our guest speaker just talking about what he's been doing and his interaction with animal rights, it's going to be done as a form of interview, as I mentioned. I've known of Ronnie Lee for many years. I mean, I've been involved in animal rights, one form or another, for over 35 years or so. And I was aware of the Animal Liberation Front, of which Ronnie Lee was the press officer. I'm hopefully going to tell us a bit more about that in a few moments' time. I just want to get started, first of all, just say thank you, Ronnie, for taking time out to talk to us and be part of this meeting. I wonder if you would like to just give a very brief introduction. I've got some information I would go through from Wikipedia, but would you like to just give a brief introduction about your journey into veganism and animal rights?
Right, well, it kind of all started. I mean, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to, along this evening, and it's great. I've got a bit of a connection with London. I did live in London for many years. I mean, that's 30 years ago that I left London, but I did live there for many years. I do have, a connection with London, yes, it kind of all started way back in. Really in 1969, although perhaps really before that, because there was quite a few incidents in my life growing up where I acted to protect animals, even kind of taking on people that are a lot bigger than me to try and protect animals that they were abusing. So I think there was probably always something in me, to care about other animals. But it really all started when I was 19, it might have been even 18 actually, 18 or 19 anyway. My sister's boyfriend at the time, who became her first husband, was a vegetarian. I'd never heard of vegetarianism before, and I was curious, and he said it was because he was didn't want animals killed for him to eat, that it wasn't necessary. He was a very fit athlete. He represented the county at athletics, so it certainly didn't do him any harm. He'd been a vegetarian since quite a young boy. I was a huge meat eater at the time, but it made me really think about it. And after really quite a short time, I decided to become vegetarian myself. And then I was vegetarian for 2.5 years, and then I picked up a copy of the Vegetarian Society's magazine. There was an article in there about veganism, and also there was an adverts, for other organisations concerned with, other forms of the oppression of other animals, such as hunting and animal experiments, the fur trade, and I was horrified. I didn't know about any of this. I just thought that, animals were killed to eat, and I didn't want to be part of it. So I got in touch with the Vegan Society. I very quickly went vegan, and I very soon got involved with hunt saboteurs after I saw a news item about them on the television. And, through my involvement in the hunt saboteurs, some of us felt that stronger action needed to be taken, primarily against hunting, but we were also thinking about other forms of other ways that animals were oppressed and exploited, such as animal experiments and the fur trade, for instance. And we had a meeting in London in a basement cafe somewhere in central London. We formed a group called the Band of Mercy. There was going to be a direct action group that was, primarily was going to go to the hunt kennels and damage their vehicles the night before a hunt. That was the first thing that kind of we were planning on doing. The reason we called the group the Band of Mercy was because that was the name of an RSPCA youth group in the 19th century who were really quite militant. They, not like the RSPCA today, they damaged guns belonging to shooters and that kind of thing. They did take direct action. We wanted to revive the spirit of that, so we called ourselves Band of Mercy. There were 6 of us actually. There were 6 of us that actually founded that. And then we carried out the actions against hunt kennels. We attacked a couple of boats that were going to be used for hunting baby seals, and we tried to destroy an animal research laboratory that was being built in Milton Keynes. Eventually, I ended up, or a couple of us ended up getting arrested. I got put in prison, spent 12 months in prison. When I came out of jail, I was really pleasantly surprised at the number of people that wanted to do the same thing. Well, not go to jail, but to carry out that sort of direct action. And that's really when the name changed to the Animal Liberation Front, because there were quite a few people saying, well, they didn't really like the name, the Band of Mercy. It sounded like a religious organisation, and it didn't mention animals. It didn't mention what it was about, whereas Animal Liberation Front did. So the name was changed to Animal Liberation Front, and then it kind of carried on very much the same. We were able to do, bigger actions, including, quite large animal rescue actions, because we had more people involved. And I ended up being put in prison a couple of more times, arrested and put in prison a couple of more times. And I spent in total probably about 9 years in prison altogether. In the kind of late 1970s, I became the press officer for the ALF. It was wasn't really deliberate. It kind of really started off with the press constantly contacting me about stuff, because I was quite well known. By that time, I'd been in prison a couple of times. So they kept contacting me about different things that had happened. And in the end, I thought, okay, I might as well officially become the press officer. So that's what I did. And I was the press officer up until, I think, 1986 was I was arrested again and put in jail, and that's when someone else took that job over.
Thank you for that. Let me just one point that you mentioned, and this is in terms of my own journey, because I went from pescatarian to vegetarian to vegan. You went vegetarian to vegan. And I don't know, is it, I mean, things have been a little bit different back in the 30 whatever years ago, in that, the availability of vegan food wasn't as great as it is now. Do you think that, if you had your time again, you would have gone straight to becoming vegan rather than going via the vegetarian route?
If I'd known, about the, what happened to the cows and the calves and the hens and the chicks, if I'd known that, I think I would have gone straight to being vegan. It's just I didn't know that, and my sister's boyfriend didn't know about that either, because it's not. I mean, even today, it's not something that kind of is widely publicised, and it kind of wasn't obvious. I just thought that hens kind of laid eggs in the fields and cows had to be milked, and it was for their own good, more or less. And I kind of didn't associate that with any kind of killing or suffering. It was only when I read that article about veganism in the Vegetarian Society's magazine that I learned that. At the time I became vegetarian, had I known about that, I think I would have gone vegan.
And do you think for the people, I mean, for people today, are you, because you're still campaigning, we'll come on maybe a bit more about what the people who are participating in this, what they can do in terms of their current campaigning.
Yes.
But what you're doing now is obviously, but peaceful campaigning. But would you say that the message should be, if you can go vegan overnight, rather than making a transitional step of doing one little step at a time and dropping the meat, then the fish, and then the cheese, and the.
I think there's no reason why people can't go vegan overnight, to be quite honest, especially these days when there's so much. I mean, one of the biggest problems we had back in the day in the early 70s was that companies didn't have to list ingredients on their products.
That's right, yeah.
So, for instance, we were happily eating peanut butter until, one chap in our kind of local animal rights group wrote away to the company, which was Sunpat. That was about the only peanut butter you could get. And the letter came back saying it contained beef fat.
Yeah.
And, you know, in those days, a lot of stuff that now contains vegetables, such as bread, for instance, a lot of it contained animal fat. And so even stuff, it wasn't even vegetarian. And so it was kind of more difficult. I mean, obviously stuff like nuts and grains and, you know, vegetables and fruit, we've always had that, and you know, that's vegan. So there was always vegan food. But if you're kind of talking about stuff that's been you know, a bit processed, such as bread, and certainly, I'm certainly eating out was like really difficult. It was you know, nigh on impossible to eat out anywhere. There weren't any vegan options. Everything really contained animal products. So it's more difficult to live as a vegan. I mean, we persevered. We were kind of determined to do that, but it was much more difficult to live as a vegan in those days. Now it's kind of so much easier. I think as long as people are kind of, you know, are careful and sensible with it and make sure they get the right, you know, the right stuff. I mean, everyone should do that anyway. However long being a vegan, they should kind of, you know, try to eat a healthy diet. I think as long as people do that, I think they can go direct to vegan.
I think certainly, so it's much easier now than it was, particularly, I mean, London has always been very easy to get vegan food because there've been lots of health food stores, and then even in the you know, the shops and supermarkets, there was some vegan options, and then there's been some veggie restaurants around for ages and ages. I'm not sure about outside of London, but I think, yes, it definitely nowadays it is much easier. Carry on, just going to say something.
I said it is. I mean, even where I live, which isn't particularly progressive, sort of North Worcestershire, is not particularly progressive part of the world. We've got 2 vegan cafes. You know, within the area that our local vegan group covers, we've got 2 vegan cafes, which is brilliant. You know, so it is kind of, the more outlying areas are kind of, you know, it is a lot easier here as well.
Thank you for that. I said, going back to what's written about you, I don't know if whether you've looked at Wikipedia, but there is quite a large entry about you on there. It mentions, as you've already mentioned, about the Band of Mercy, and then it mentions about you know, creating an organization which is a bit more, you know, with a name that's more relevant, you know, the Animal Liberation Front.
Yes.
It says in here also, while you're in prison, you founded Archangel. And I remember Archangel, and I remember people used to come to London Vegans and sell the magazine. Any idea what happened to that?
Well, it's no longer published. It hasn't been published for a number of years, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. You know, probably the prevalence of the internet had something to do with that, and people are getting their information much more online these days than they used to. But yes, I mean, I did start that in prison. I wrote almost the first edition was totally written by me in prison, and they I mean, normally what happens in prison is you're allowed to write letters and receive letters, but that's kind of limited. The number is limited. Yeah. But they actually allowed me to say, I said, look, I'm, you know, writing a magazine, and, you know, can I hand the, you know, the sheets that I've written out on visits? And they said, well, yes, you can. You know, so that was brilliant. I wasn't just confined to letters. But then an organisation called the Research Defence Society, who is they're pro animal experimentation. They complained to the Home Office, you know, why is this man allowed to write this magazine? And so they then clamped down on me, and they said, oh, you can write articles for the magazine, but you've got to do it in your ordinary letters. So that, you know, really restricted how much I could write. But by that, you know, it had taken off, and other people were contributing to it. So it didn't really make an awful lot of difference.
Because we know Robin Lane, who I think used to do the press officer. So I don't know whether it was the one after you or 2 after you.
Yeah, Robin took over as press officer after me, and he ended up being put in prison as well. Not for as long as me. I mean, you know, when I was the press officer and I was put on trial, I ended up getting a 10-year sentence. Robin's was less. I think his was maybe 6 or 9 months, something like that, because of course he hadn't done it for as long as me, and he was fairly new to the job. And he got arrested. And then a guy called Robin Webb then took over as press officer, and he did it for a number of years.
Yeah.
But I think that job, I don't think that there isn't a press officer now for the Animal Liberation Front. The actions, there are far fewer ALF actions now than there were back in the day. So there probably isn't really, so much of a need for somebody like that now.
Well, I was going to ask about that because you're right. I mean, I remember going on. I wasn't involved with Animal Liberation Front, but I remember there was some events at which Robin Webb was attending as press officer. Nowadays, you have the Animal Rebellion, an organisation called Direct Action Everywhere, which I assume you're familiar with. I just wondered what your thoughts are in relation. I mean, it's a different type of direct action. It's direct action, but it's not it's a liberation, and it's not, I would say, excessive damage.
No,
so,
no.
It's sort of a tamed down version of what you might call ALF activity, I would say.
It kind of is, but I think it's probably more relevant to the times now, because you see what happens. Things are completely different now to what they used to be. And one of the main things that's changed is the prevalence of closed circuit television.
Yeah. That
it's so much more difficult to do something and get away with it now, because you can be traced. If you make a car journey, you can be traced all the way. And so it's much more difficult to do that type of action now and to get away with it. The type of action that the ALF did, and also prison sentences became much harsher. The police became much more active in tracking down people. They set up special squads. And so for really quite a number of reasons, the type of action that the ALF, took once upon a time. There's still some ALF actions now, but there are really quite few and far between, because it's much difficult to, for a number of reasons, to carry out those actions. So I think that's one of the reasons why direct action has changed, and people aren't doing things now where they're attempting to kind of get away. Not really. Right. The kind of the sort of actions that happen. It's like there's another group called Meet the Victims, where they go into farms basically, and it's kind of just to expose what's going on.
Right.
The type of action that Animal Rebellion do, to like kind of blockades and stuff like that. There was the recent action where there was 3 guys rescued. I think it was 5 beagles from MBR acres, and they gave themselves up to the police. They didn't try to get away.
Yeah.
You see, so that type of thing, the type of direct action that happens now is where people aren't attempting to kind of escape and get away with it. They're kind of, they just go in there. And of course, in terms of the type of sentences they would get for that sort of thing, it's not the sort of action that would attract long sentences.
Yeah. I was asking somebody, this is specifically about Animal Rebellion, and why do, say, Animal Rebellion, why would they, for example, or even Extinction Rebellion, why would they sort of go on a motorway or stick themselves to some railings or whatever it may be? And the answer primarily was publicity. Within ALF activities, there was a range of activities, and there was, at one end, you've got the rescue of animals, but at the other end, you have what I call damage, whether it's damage to people or damage to property.
Yeah, well, we didn't.
If I just say, on that side of things, it's just that for those of us who have been involved in animal rights and what I would call the handing out the leaflets and the peaceful campaigning, there's been this sort of niggling thing in our minds of, is it such a good thing that we're trying to get a peaceful message about animal rights over there, and animal rights. In fact, there were times when I actually using animal rights as a name, I felt a bit guilty, because people were associating it with people setting fire to buildings or whatever it may be. So I just wondered what your thought, because obviously you've been involved in an organization that has been doing direct action, but can you see the other side of that, of how it may be there's some detrimental effect on those people who are doing what I call the more peaceful campaigning?
I tended to think, because I kind of sort of used to get this in a sense because, you know, after I came out of prison on my last sentence, which was in 1992, I thought, well, I need to change the type of action I'm doing now because the police are going to be watching me. I carry on along the same road. And so I started doing, you know, street stalls, and I did a lot of stalls for kind of protecting whales and dolphins.
Yeah.
But I always gave people information about veganism as well. It was a good way of giving information about veganism to people who at least cared about some animals. I had people there saying, you're not anything to do with these people that burn places, are you? You know, so anything really to do with animals, that people would ask that question. And I think they were kind of, I think the people that got the most angry about ALF actions are probably people that were a kind of lost cause anyway, if you see what I mean. And so, you know, we didn't worry too much about that. You see the kind of the thinking behind the ALF was really completely different to what the thinking is behind, say, vegan outreach.
Okay.
The thinking behind the ALF was really that we kind of wanted to put these people out of business.
Right.
We wanted to kind of, because there was the, you know, the rescuing of the animals, which was obviously to save those individual animals, and there was a certain amount of publicity to be gained from it as well. But the damage actions, I mean, they kind of escalated. It started off when we started off going to the hunt kennels, for instance. Yeah. We thought, well, we'll damage their vehicles so they can't go out and harm animals. You see, so it was like a kind of preventative measure.
Yeah.
But then that kind of escalated to the idea of economic sabotage, where we thought we want to cause as much damage as possible to these companies so that they can't operate, so they go out of business, and so they can no longer, you know, do animal experiments or whatever else they were doing. And there was really considerable success with that way of thinking. I mean, the ALF did succeed in, or was a major factor in a big reduction in the number of animal experiments that took place, yeah. And also was a major factor in the decimation of the fur trade. You know, going back to say the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s, there were really there were fur shops everywhere. Fur shops everywhere. In every town had a fur shop. London had loads of fur shops. There was, so I lived in Bounds Green in North London, and just round the corner from where I lived, in a little side street, there was a fur shop. They were everywhere. And loads of department stores sold fur. And really, I think as a result of ALF action, you know, damage action against these places, that they all really stopped selling fur. And really, the only place now where you get kind of actual high street fur shops is in just kind of one part of central London, I think. I mean, you can get it fur online, and there are places that operate behind closed doors elsewhere. But on the high street, they just don't exist anymore, apart from just one part of London. And department stores, the only department store now that sells fur is Harrods. It's all gone. And so that was a major kind of success for that type of action. But you see, I think the problem, I would say, with you know, with ALF actions, that type of action, was that it was never going to achieve. Yeah, we could make a certain amount of progress. We could kind of, you know, spare. Well, it resulted in being many millions of animals were spared from suffering and slaughter. But there was a real limitation to how much could be achieved, because I think if we really want to achieve widespread animal liberation, we can only do that through public education, because unless you know, a substantial number of people actually believe in animal liberation, unless, you know, really quite a large number of people are opposed to the oppression of other animals from humans, we're not going to achieve animal liberation. So if we want it to become big, we want it to become like widespread, we have to go down the route of education, and that's not going to be achieved by direct action. So although the animal liberation achieved a lot, it kind of it was limited in the gains that it could make. And that's why I'm very much these days an advocate of vegan outreach in terms of the way.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, and what I'm saying is, I see both sides. I can understand how you've got the attack on for the economic reasons, and the organizations like SHAC were doing just the same.
Yes.
But at the same time, the other side is, are you alienating the public by doing that? Whereas if you're doing the outreach work, that's about how to educate and inform without having to be tarnished by what I call the direct action. Okay.
Yeah, I think the question, if someone's got it in them to care about animals, and they've got it in them to, change the way they live, when they're educated about what happens to animals, is the fact that some other people are causing some damage elsewhere going to make any difference to that? And I kind of don't think it is really. I think if someone, because when you're doing outreach, talking about what happens to the animals, and that people are contributing that through their lifestyle and through their choices, and you're trying to get them to change as individuals, and so it's more about that. And so the fact that the other day someone went and damaged somewhere, is that going to make someone say, well, I would have cared about animals, but because someone did that, I'm not going to. I'm not really sure that it really works like that.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that one. What was that next question? Can you be I know you're involved with the Green Party. Do you think you can be an environmentalist and not be vegan?
Well, in a sense, kind of no, because the consumption of animal products or animal farming and fishing, that's a huge contributor to the destruction of the environment. It's a huge contributor to the climate crisis. In fact, it may very well be the major contributor, to global warming, and also to the destruction of pollution, the extinction of species and all these things. Animal farming and fishing, particularly industrialized fishing, are huge contributors to that. So for someone to be an environmentalist and not be vegan, they're missing out they're actually contributing to the destruction of the environment in a very big way by still consuming animal products. But I think it also works the other way around. I don't think you can be truly vegan and not be an environmentalist.
Interesting.
You see, no, because the human impact or adverse human impact on the natural world is a huge contributor to the suffering and slaughter of other animals. You take, for instance, the climate crisis and global warming, global heating, really. That obviously, I think that's kind of a huge contributor to that is animal farming and as I said, fishing as well. But there are other factors as well that contribute to that, such as the burning of fossil fuels. And the climate crisis is a major cause of suffering and slaughter of other animals. We've got billions of wild animals being wiped out as a result of the climate crisis, through the fires, through destruction of the habitats, through temperature change and through kind of all sorts of factors associated with that. It's a major, and other ways in which humans adversely impact on the natural world, destruction of habitats and pollution, all those things. Our transport systems, the number of animals that fall victim to motor vehicles on the roads, and there's all these things. And that is down to human behaviour. We're to blame for that as a species, and that's and so to that, and I think that is a major issue for vegans, and we need to be concerned about that. And it's part of the vegan ethic for us to be doing something about that.
So it's an interesting one, because there are a lot of vegans who are not necessarily environmentalists, and a lot of environmentalists who aren't particularly vegan. So whether that will change, I think a lot of people are becoming more aware, of course, of global warming or global heating, and people are changing their diet. But there's this question about, can you maybe, if you eat locally sourced meat, fish, etc., whether that's enough?
Yeah.
And they will make excuses as to why they do that.
They do. I mean, on that point, it's the method of production of food is a far greater factor in terms of its impact on the climate and on the environment than how far it's travelled. Yeah. So in other words, vegan food from the other side of the world, it is less harmful to the environment, contributes less to the climate crisis than buying some meat from down the road.
Yeah,
it's the way it's produced is made fat. But coming back to whether can you be an environmentalist but not be vegan? I mean, I think we kind of need to distinguish between vegan and plant-based because they're not the same.
Yeah. Okay.
It could be that environmentalists kind of need to be plant-based, maybe, because see, veganism is a philosophy of animal liberation. It isn't just about food. It isn't just about not consuming animal products. It's believing, that animals should not be oppressed, other animals should not be oppressed or exploited by humans in any way, right? So if we're just talking about, the impact of consuming animal products on the environment, and an environmentalist should not consume animal products, we're not actually suggesting that the environmentalists become vegan. We're suggesting that they become plant-based. So perhaps it should be, you can't be an environment. You can't be an environment without environmentalist without being plant-based. That might be more accurate, because to be vegan, they have to be an animal liberationist.
Okay, so I think maybe then some of the plant-based people might have to have a little bit of an argument as to whether they're vegan or not, but that's up for further down the road as to.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. What about this question about being an abolitionist versus being a sort of, I'm not saying necessarily welfareist, but you mentioned about you were doing some stores, and I think you mentioned about whales and dolphins, and there are some single issue things that you have been campaigning on.
Yeah. And
yet there are others that say, you know what, we shouldn't be campaigning on any of those single issues. It's literally just campaign on veganism. And they don't always see eye to eye, because one's taken one extreme view of, you know what, don't worry about improving the, I mean, for example, I've been involved for many years with animal aid, and I'm a member of Viva and other groups, and some of the campaigns are, I mean, although at the end of the day, it's about they want people to be going vegan, it's about, let's see whether we can make some improvement in the quality of life for the animals in order to get there. Whereas an abolitionist says, forget all about that, just campaign on being vegan. So what are your thoughts, Ronnie?
Well, I think one, there are single issues that are abolitionist, within the single issue. In other words, that they want that particular form of the oppression of other animals to be abolished. I mean, for many years, my wife Louise and I ran a campaign against the greyhound racing industry.
Yeah,
and we wanted, commercial greyhound racing to be abolished, and we succeeded, or we played a big part in closing down quite a few dog tracks and preventing other ones from being opened, and that reduced the number of dogs, being bred. And so it reduced the number of dogs that were suffered and were killed by the racing industry. Yeah. And that was an abolitionist campaign. We didn't want, I mean, at the time, the League Against Cruel Sports were saying, oh, we want better conditions for the dogs. We want the tracks to be made safer so there's not more injury and all that. The League now are abolitionist in terms of greyhound racing. At the time, they weren't.
Yeah.
And we very much objected to there, because they said, look, you're letting these people off the hook, you're giving people an excuse to still go to dog racing because they think, oh, well, there's going to be these reforms and it'll be okay. And so we didn't like that. We were abolitionist in terms of that particular single issue, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Now, I think I would always, if I were campaigning on a single issue, it would be abolitionist in that sense. But I think, you see, campaigning on single issues can be a really good gateway to veganism. It's, like I said, when I campaigned, for the whales and dolphins, and that was to end the killing of whales and dolphins, that was an abolitionist campaign. But I would give people leaflets about veganism, because how I looked at it was there were people coming up to the store who cared about some animals, they cared about whales and dolphins. So I thought, well, there is something there to work with. So, give them leaflets about veganism, let them extend their, what you might call a circle of compassion to all animals. And I've done the same recently, something that's really big at the moment is Camp Beagles and the MBR Beagles and all that. And I recently did a stall. Well, I did a stall on last Sunday at it was a local fun dog show to raise funds for a local dog rescue. And I did a kind of joint stall there. It was, a stall promoting veganism, but also a stall to kind of, related to Camp Beagle to get signatures on a petition to kind of end animal experiments. And a lot of people came up to the stall because, of course, these were people that cared about dogs. It was an event put on by a dog rescue. Lots of people were there with their dogs. They were attracted to the stall. Some people were attracted by the vegan element and, came to that part of the stall. Others came to the part of the stall which was to do with, saving the beagles and all other laboratory animals. And, because these people cared about dogs. And I gave those people information about veganism as well, because I thought, well, you care about dogs. So let me, educate you to care about all animals. And in fact, one of the leaflets I gave to people was Animal Aid do a very good leaflet, say, I love one and eat the other. And as you probably see, a puppy and a piglet on the front. I gave everyone one of those, you see. So you can kind of, I think single issues kind of can be used in that way, because sometimes if you have a store that's just say go vegan, some people think, oh, I can never go vegan, I'm not going to go up to that store. Whereas in fact, I think it's a lot easier for people to go vegan than they think, or certainly to live as a vegan than they think. And so to kind of use these single issues as a gateway to attract people is a good thing. And I think that a lot of vegans kind of campaign on single issues rather than for veganism. And I'd say to those people, don't give up campaigning on the single issue. This is something that's always close to, like, a lot of people care passionately about animal experimentation, and they're very focused on that because they see it as torture and it's something that really gets to them emotionally. And I'd say to them, don't stop campaigning on that. But when you campaign on that, include a vegan element. When you're giving people information, give them information about veganism as well. Incorporate veganism into your campaign. I mean, when we ran our greyhound protection campaign, on the main page of our website, we had a big item about veganism that people could see as soon as they, and it was, other animals are oppressed as well. It's not just greyhounds, and you can help them all. It was that kind of approach. And the other thing I'd say is why, to the people that are kind of focused on single issues, is that form of campaigning is actually good for the single issues that they're campaigning on as well. Because if you look at it, all these things that people campaign on as single issues, animal experiments, and people are still campaigning on the fur trade. That's still going on to some extent, and animal racing, hunting, and all these things. How are these things going to come to an end? What's going to really end these things, completely? And what we want is abolition, isn't it? In terms of Parliament, we want laws abolishing these things. And how's that going to come about? That's only going to come about if we've got the right people in Parliament to do it, right? And so if we increase the number of vegans, then we're going to increase the number of vegan politicians, because some of those vegans will want to become politicians, and then you increase the number of vegans that can vote for those politicians. So if we eventually want like a vegan administration in this country, which we'd all love to have, or a vegan run administration that would abolish all these things, then the way to achieve that is through vegan education. So vegan education actually helps bring about the abolition of all these things that all these single issues that people are concerned about.
Thank you for sharing that. Very recently, you were involved in a debate, and within that, it was in relation to some large-scale vegan events. And the impression I got is that you were not in favour of these sort of big vegan festivals and the like, because you felt they were not doing the outreach and they were just preaching to the converted. That's the impression I got from that. You managed to remain incredibly calm throughout that whole. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about.
Oh yes, absolutely, yes. Yeah,
I don't know whether you like to just express a view on that, because I think for many of us, I mean, I've been vegan, I said, for over 30-something years now, and I mean, for me, going to a vegan event, even if 99.9% of the people there are vegan, it's reaffirming my involvement in the vegan movement. And it may well be that some people do go who are maybe just vegetarian or not even vegan or vegetarian, and just to explore what's available. So, but I'd just like to get a little bit of information or feedback from you on that, as to why you took that particular view, that you should be just doing local events rather than these sort of larger events.
Well, I mean, first of all, my main concern about the vegan camp out was its location, and I wondered whether really enough effort was put into finding a place, that the location that kind of wasn't so involved in the oppression of other animals as the place that was chosen.
But there was a separate issue which was about Veg Fest.
Yeah, the thing about, yeah, I mean, my concern, I mean, I wouldn't say that these big events, I think there are a lot of positives about big events, and I wouldn't say that, you know, they do nothing in terms of educating people to become vegan. But I think there's in terms of some of the big vegan festivals, I think there can be problems in the sense that where something charges a lot of money for people to get in, it's likely to deter non-vegans from attending. That's one of my concerns. And I think with something like the camp out, I mean, what I'd like to see, quite possibly as well as the camp out, is lots of more localized and more regionalized events that are probably less costly for people to attend, nearer to where they live, and where they're going to meet people that are kind of more from the local area, because those are the people that they really work with in terms of doing outreach. And in fact, that's kind of something positive, I think, that's come out of all the furore concerning the location of the camp out, is what we're seeing now is animal sanctuaries, you know, sanctuaries for farmed animals that are vegan run, are starting to stage that, they have land that can be used for campouts, and they're starting to stage these events. There's been 2 or 3 this year, and I think there's going to be quite a few more this year and next year, because that's good for fundraising. They're all in need of funds, and so what's happening is, you've got something that's more localized or more regionalized. They're going to be obviously smaller, but something that's much more grassroots, and where the money raised goes to the sanctuary.
Right.
And for me, that's, I kind of prefer that model. I'm not saying that, no good comes from, the bigger events.
Yeah.
Just that I think that maybe with these smaller, more localized events, more grassroots events, we can actually achieve more.
Because there have been, for many years, there've been vegan camps. I've never been to one, but there's been sort of small vegan camps. It's only the camp out has become this big thing. But yeah. Before then, there were some smaller ones, but they were not like loads of them all the way around the country. There were just one a year. I think the challenge maybe with the sanctuary is, obviously you can't have incredibly loud noise if you've got animals there. So,
No,
so
but,
that might be a
why,
separate issue, but
why do people want loud noise anyway? Why? I mean, you can have local musicians. You see, this is the thing.
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
You can have local vegan musicians, you know, like playing acoustically, and you know that I think that probably far more pleasant. So it can be something that's kind of more localized, more grassroots, where you know.
So do you accept there's a place for both the larger scale ones and also these small grassroots ones, rather than just saying let's get rid of the large ones and just have the small ones?
Well, I think we'll see what happens. I mean, whether the having all the small ones will affect the large one, I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily an either or thing. I'd like to see. I very much believe in localism. I very much believe in you know, people trying to do things in their own local areas, and I think we don't have nearly enough of that in terms of outreach, and which mostly takes place in the centre of big cities. In so many towns, suburbs of cities, even villages, nothing happens, and I think that's, you know, we need to do something about that, and I think there is a way of doing something about that, and in the sense that what I'm saying about the, you know, about the vegan camping events kind of feeds into that. This is kind of becoming more localized in our thinking and in the way we operate and, you know, interact with people, because it's in our local area where we really need to educate people about veganism.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, I was going to ask you is, in terms of what you're now doing, I think you've slightly covered it, but what, you know, for the people who are watching this either live on the Zoom or subsequently on YouTube or on the Facebook, for those of us who are vegan but are not as active, in other words, we are, you know, all we do, we go on YouTube or Facebook every so often. What would you suggest that we could be doing that could make a bit of a difference to get the message out there?
Well, if I give an example of what we do locally in our local vegan group, I mean, going back to what I said first of all previously about, if you look at where outreach takes place, it's almost always in the centre of big cities. People will go there and they'll do maybe a Cube of Truth, or they'll do an Earthlings experience, or they'll do some other events in the centre of a big city. And that's great. It's great that those things happen, and I wouldn't like to see those things come to an end. But of course, the problem is that there are so many other areas where people live where there's no vegan education happening. And you know, so many towns where nothing happens in terms of vegan education. I mean, where I live, it's an area called Wild Forest in North Worcestershire. You know, it's an area that covers 3 towns that are quite close together, total population about 100,000. So it's, you know, it's not an area, it's not like a big city area or anything like that. And the other towns we have one small city and several other towns in our county, and really nothing happens in these other places at all. And yet there's loads of vegans live there.
Yeah,
loads of vegans live there. And the kind of thing that we do locally, we do a lot of what I call door dropping, is leaflet delivery. You know, putting leaflets through people's letterboxes. We get leaflets from Animal Aid and Viva, for instance, that you can get them for nothing, or, you know, they're quite inexpensive. And we'll either, a few of us will get together and have a bit of an event, or people will just take a couple of 100 leaflets and just deliver them locally, you know, around where they live. And for instance, if we go back, you know, we've had several door dropping campaigns, but we go back to sort of like, say, last Christmas, we always have a campaign on the lead up to Christmas that we call our Compassionate Christmas campaign, and we get once again leaflets from Viva and Animal Aid, and we'll door drop those, and we also dress up as Santa and give them out in the town centre or the centre of our largest town in Kidderminster. And we distributed about 8,000 of those coming up to Christmas. And then for Veganuary, we had to have our own leaflets printed for Veganery, because Veganery don't supply the leaflets, they supply the artwork.
Yeah.
And you get your own printed. That's what we did. And we added our own local information onto it. And once again, we distributed about 8,000 of those, and that's through volunteers asking people, can you door drop these in your own area? And people will take a few hundred and just pop them through letterboxes. And what could be easier? What could be an easier way of spreading the message? And you can reach loads of people through that method. And we do street stalls as well. We do stalls at other events that are kind of linked to veganism, or sort of linked to the vegan diet, shall we say. Like we're part of a local Green Alliance that, where there's groups in it like the local Friends of the Earth and transition groups and that kind of thing. Extinction Rebellion are part of it as well. And through that, we were able to hold stalls at their events, like they have greener living fairs where we hold stalls. We had a sustainability festival where we held a few stalls and that kind of thing. And also local health events. We were able to get a stall at like a kind of local health event. That there was one at a kind of local hotel a while back, because there's a connection, certainly with the vegan diet and health, there's a connection. Yes. So this is the thing that the vegan diet has a connection to, several different issues. The other thing I mentioned at the fundraising events for the local dog rescues, we'll have stalls at their events as well, and that kind of thing. So it's this kind of more community, a more community-based outreach, really, rather than kind of just people. It's kind of sort of more like a hit and run approach people have to outreach. Go into a centre of a big city, people come from all around the centre of a big city. Maybe people do stuff in Leicester Square, don't they? Trafalgar Square in London. Yeah. And that's great, that's brilliant that people are doing that. And I'm not suggesting what I'm saying do instead of that. I'm saying kind of as well, because all those people that go to those places, they don't live in Leicester Square, they don't live in Trafalgar Square. They live in, one of the suburbs of London. Well, I'd say, well, how about getting some outreach going where you live? Get together with a few vegans, because there's vegans everywhere. There'll be a few, even if it's just two of you. You can do loads of stuff on your own, really. Do that on your own. But if you want to get together, it's always nice to do stuff with other people, and certainly for holding stalls, it's better to have more than one person.
Oh, absolutely.
And, get together in your local suburb of London where you live, form a vegan group in that suburb, right, and start doing outreach in that community. Your door drop in, there'll be local events, there'll be events at maybe a local church hall or community centre where you can have a stall. We have a local Christmas fair that raises money for like just kind of local charities. We have a stall there, and we give we kind of advertise free vegan recipes, and we give away vegan recipe booklets. There's a very good one that Animal Aid do called plant-based cooking on the budget. It's really good because that's got the recipes, but it's also got stuff about what happens. There's nothing graphic. It's got stuff about what happens to the animals in it, and so the ethical reasons for veganism as well. So it's a really good way of getting people to take the information. Just look for any event that you can do a stall, and kind of I think if we had this sort of community outreach everywhere, because it's not a big thing to do. It's not like a really difficult thing to organize or something that's kind of going to be stressful. It's quite these are kind of low stress activities, really. A bit of door dropping, doing a stall at a community event. They're quite gentle things in a way, but that's kind of the a kind of positive thing, because you're wanting to interact with ordinary people in a friendly way and educate them about veganism.
Yeah.
And it's a way of doing that kind of where we can get the message everywhere. And I always say to people, my kind of mantra, you probably heard me say before, is obviously I'd say to people, if you're not vegan, go vegan. But I'd say, well, if you're vegan but not an activist, become an activist. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to kind of go and glue yourself in McDonald's or something. It's just, you can be an activist just by delivering leaflets or, that's being an activist, that's spreading the message. Letters in your local newspaper. We have a little group of people that write letters to the local newspaper promoting veganism whenever they can. It's better to have more than one person because they get fed up with the same person writing. So have a little group of people local newspapers aren't read as much as they used to be, but like they still are, and people tend to look at the letters page. It's a good way of and put a website. We always put a link to usually to the Vegan Society's website in there, so people can go somewhere for more information. And I think that to me this is the only way. And as I said, if you're not an activist, become an activist. If you're kind of an activist, but not an organizer, become an organizer. In other words, if you're someone that's already active in kind of outreach and you're going off to join a group of people in Leicester Square or wherever, then, as I said before, think about, well, what can I do as an organizer in my local area? Can I get, a bit of outreach going with local vegans? Because what we found is, like a lot of our people locally that do stuff, that do delivering the leaflets that maybe help at the stalls, they're not the sort of people that would kind of go to Birmingham to join in because Birmingham's our nearest big city, to join in a big event or anything. They're not that type of person, or maybe they're not able to do that. But locally, they're quite happy to do, some stuff in the local area. So there's a lot, you can recruit a lot of vegans into outreach that probably wouldn't normally do outreach as it kind of happens at the moment, you see. And I think if we can get that going everywhere, we can educate far more people to go vegan, and that's going to have, wide-ranging consequences in terms of how those people behave as consumers or like non-consumers of animal products to start with, but also, as I said before, how they behave politically and how they vote and stuff like that, and that can make a difference as well.
Thanks for that. We're coming towards the end of our time. I just wonder if anybody has any questions. Can you just type your name into the chat box so it just comes, so it mentions who you are, or you can raise your hand, and I may be able to see if you raise your hand. Just say, Hina asked, do you have any regrets about your activities with the ALF, and has being in prison affected your way of life in any way, and if so, how?
Yeah, the ALF. Well, I mean, first of all, regarding the ALF, it's kind of yes and no in terms of regrets. I think the ALF was achieved a tremendous amount in terms of sparing. The ALF spared millions, tens of millions of animals from suffering and slaughter. Especially when you look at the impact it had, certainly in here in the UK. On animal experimentation and on the fur trade in particular. Those were the two main areas that the ALF had the biggest impact on. And so, no, I'm, kind of proud that I was part of that. But kind of if we look at it at a deeper level, and what I said earlier about the importance of education and how it's really through education that we're going to achieve animal liberation, because we have to change the way that not everyone, just as I would say a substantial minority of people. Because, say for instance, I mean, what I want to see is I want to see a vegan administration in this country. It's run by vegans. So, but you wouldn't need to change everyone to achieve that. I mean, our present government was elected by less than 30% of people that were eligible to vote. So you could say, well, all we got to change is like 30% of people, gets 30% of people on board, and like we can run the show then, and then we can kind of, bring in those laws to protect animals. We can, change the way that agriculture works. And bring in plant-based agriculture and all that kind of stuff. If we increase the number of vegans sufficiently, and 30% it seems a large number, but I think it's doable. I think if we can get enough, and it may not even be even be 30%. Like I know there was research done. George Monbiot's, been looking into this, and he reckons the figure's 25%. If you change the minds of, get 25% of the population thinking a certain way, then all of a sudden everything tips, and everything can change. So we might be only looking at 25%, but that's still a lot. Still a lot of people, and that still demands a lot of education. And I think that's the kind of only way that we achieve widespread animal liberation. And I often think, well, what happened in the animal rights movement really was born in the 1970s, and the concept of animal liberation, the term speciesism, for instance, was coined in the 1970s. It was like the kind of everything in terms of sort of the more kind of radicalization of the movement, or the movement becoming more militant, shall we say, in terms of the protection of other animals. Kind of pretty much goes back to the 1970s. I mean, the Hunt Saboteur started a bit earlier in the 60s, but it's all kind of around about that time. And and I do often think, had we started on vegan outreach then, because really vegan outreach is quite recent in terms of the history of what you might call the animal protection movement. We've only really had vegan outreach in any kind of big way, or even almost in any way at all, for about 25 years. It's kind of more or less the mid-1990s when people started doing the vegan fairs and stuff like that. So it's quite a new thing. And had that started way back in the 70s, then we might be a lot further on than we are now. And so I think that if I'm put on the spot and asked, if I had my time again, what would I do? I think, well, instead of the ALF, I'd try and get some vegan outreach going, way back then. And it would have been more difficult. Of course, it was much more difficult to live as a vegan. But we would have, I mean, the vegan society at the time, they did kind of promote veganism in that they're kind of, the leading lights in the vegan society then would go and give talks and stuff like that to promote veganism. But there was no kind of street vegan outreach at all, in those, or kind of anything like that kind of tried to, get to ordinary people like I kind of have been speaking about just now.
Yeah. No, I agree. I used to do animal rights stalls when we would have leaflets about animal rights events, but we wouldn't have anything about veganism. It was a bit too way off.
I think we thought that because it was kind of so difficult to live as a vegan that it was like a non-starter.
Yeah,
we sort of had this idea, well, we need to get rid of these other things first and then we'll think about veganism. But I think that was a mistake.
Yeah.
Because the way you get rid of those other things is by promoting veganism. And I think had vegan outreach started way back then, we might be a lot further along now. And so that's kind of how I look at it.
I've got a question from John. I'll leave John to have the last question. If you want unmuting, John.
Yes.
I do want to.
Oh, yes.
What's the question?
Very good talk. Obviously, the general public's opinion of veganism and things like animal rights and direct action seems to have changed over the years. People are more pro-vegan, and they understand why some people do things the way they do. Do you think that the police and the judiciary have also changed quite a bit in their reaction? You see people doing Extinction Rebellion things and getting either let off or getting 1 day in prison or something like that. Do you think the police and the judiciary now are changing quite a lot as well as the general public are?
Good question.
Yeah, no, that is a very good question. I think perhaps to some extent they are, and it's true that people have been charges have been dropped against a lot of people. For instance, that the lads that rescued the beagles from MBR Acres, the charges against them were dropped, and I think that's. I think a lot of it might be to do with just that the courts and the police are overwhelmed now, and they can't, they can't cope, and so where people are facing minor charges, those are dropped because it just, just to give them breathing space. I mean, that might be quite a big factor in that. I think the other thing is that the companies, I mean, in order to have a prosecution, for instance, the guys that rescued those beagles, MBR ACUS would have to give evidence at their court case in order for them to be successfully prosecuted. And if MBR ACUS say, no, we don't want to give evidence, we don't want publicity, then the police can't proceed with the case. And so I think a lot of it might be these places not wanting publicity, and so saying that they want the charges dropped, and then the police have to do that. So that could be a factor as well. But in a sense, that's kind of comes back to public awareness as well, because they're in not wanting the publicity, they're going to be aware that the publicity is not going to do them any good because of public opinion. So that comes back to public opinion as well. So yes, I think there has been a shift. I mean, certainly I kind of notice it in doing stalls. And when I do stalls about veganism or other issues, there's a lot more sympathy and interest from the public than there used to be. And there's far less antagonism. There seems to be a lot less, a lot fewer people coming up and having a go and stuff than at one time. So I think there kind of has been a change, yeah.
Thanks for your question, John. We're going to finish the meeting there. I just say again, a very big thank you to Ronnie for talking to us this evening and sharing your views. I hope everybody that's been watching and participating has found it fascinating as I have. If those people are participating on Zoom, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and have a round of applause for Ronnie, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I wish you, all
just quickly say you said you're doing something particularly with Huglets. Do you want to?
Well, yes. But basically, what it is that Wenda, who's one of the people that runs Huglets Farm Animal Sanctuary, Wenda and I, we've got this project called Forward to Animal Liberation, which is like a series of discussions about various issues relating to animal liberation. For instance, we had our most popular one was about the McPlant burger, McDonald's McPlant burger, and kind of how vegans should react to that, and is it okay for vegans to go in McDonald's now, that kind of thing. And we've had over 6,000 views on that one, on that particular discussion that we had. And it's a Facebook page called Forward to Animal Liberation. If you look that up on Facebook, there's a number of discussions. There's probably about 8 on there now, and we've got more coming up that Wenda and I have. And so that's something that might be, people might like to look at. And then there's other stuff on if you look at my YouTube, find my YouTube channel, there's other stuff on there, including that as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the live stream and stop the recording.